Breaking news today. The White House is considering a proposal to swap territories between Russia and Ukraine to end the ongoing war. This idea has sparked a frenzy among the usual globalist factions. Why are Washington elites so resistant to a deal that prioritizes American interests and challenges decades of unsuccessful interventions? Stay tuned. This development could transform the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe and significantly alter the establishment's control over foreign policy.
Hello, and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
Station reports that President Trump's peace negotiations with Russia now involve territory swaps between Russia and Ukraine. This raises a critical question, since when is it the United States' role to redraw Eastern European borders? Historically, Washington's experts, particularly under the previous Democratic administration, have entangled us in foreign conflicts under the guise of promoting democracy, only to result in chaos and warfare. In contrast, President Trump is adopting a novel approach through direct negotiations and practical compromises, offering a genuine opportunity to resolve a long-standing bloody conflict, a situation that the globalist elite appears eager to extend. The media and their allies in Brussels are already expressing alarm. Why? Because this deal, though controversial, highlights their past failures. They had ample opportunity to broker peace, but chose instead to arm one side, sanction the other, and pursue total victory, disregarding the cost to ordinary Ukrainians and American taxpayers. While negotiated settlements are rarely ideal, prioritizing abstract ideals over tangible human lives and stability is a privilege reserved for those who do not bear the consequences of their decisions. So tonight we pose a fundamental question. Is it preferable for America to continue fueling a distant war, or to back a president who prioritizes American interests and peace over globalist ambitions? The answer seems clear. Let's do this.
Floating a deal that would have these kinds of ceding of territory to Russia to European allies. Part of that being because they want European buy-in on any plan before President Trump sits down with Vladimir Putin. Now, the other thing I thought was interesting in this conversation was that he said that he believes that Vladimir Putin wants peace. Obviously, we heard Trump say that several weeks ago, but the last several weeks since then, he has had nothing but really angry and frustrated comments when he was asked about Vladimir Putin. He was specifically asked again, do you still think he wants peace? And he said he didn't know, that he'd been disappointed by Putin. Now we are back on this Putin wants peace piece of all of this. So this is clearly still...
European leaders are urgently convening as the United States and Russia progress in direct negotiations that could significantly alter Eastern Europe's geopolitical landscape. The exclusion of Ukraine and key European allies from these discussions raises critical questions about the long-standing interventionist and globalist strategies that have shaped Western foreign policy. For decades, experts in Brussels and Washington have advocated for a hard-line approach, including relentless sanctions and continuous military support. Yet these measures have only led to prolonged conflict, a devastated Ukraine, and significant economic and security repercussions for Europe. As we approach the Alaska summit, there is a growing recognition that achieving lasting peace may require difficult compromises. The prospect of territorial swaps, while contentious, mirrors the current realities and the limitations of Western influence. The insistence on restoring Ukraine's pre-war borders has proven unrealistic, echoing the failures seen in Afghanistan, Libya, and Iraq by the same policymakers, who remain unaccountable for the aftermath of their decisions. Their desperation to maintain U.S. involvement in prolonged conflicts exposes a disregard for the consequences borne by American families and European stability. And the Democratic establishment and their neoconservative counterparts prefer prolonging the conflict over acknowledging their failed strategies. They prioritize protecting their influence and the interests of the military-industrial complex over genuine democratic values, dismissing any opportunity for negotiation and vilifying proponents of diplomacy. Their outrage at President Trump's readiness to negotiate a deal that prioritizes American interests is indicative of their broader agenda. Critics of the peace talks, who have supported every unsuccessful intervention over the past 30 years, profess concern for Ukrainian sovereignty, yet offer no workable solution to end the conflict other than escalating military involvement. This approach neglects the needs of American cities and the management of our own borders. The United States should not act as the world's policeman. Our involvement has only extended the suffering and postponed the necessary confrontation with difficult truths. If European security is a genuine concern, it is time for European leaders to assume responsibility for regional stability. The era of the U.S. subsidizing European security crises must conclude. Americans are weary of bearing the cost of globalist agendas that fail to safeguard our interests. This summit presents an opportunity to shift the focus from posturing to peace, acknowledging that the best resolution might involve accepting imperfect terms to cease the bloodshed. As the summit unfolds, globalist media and think tanks will likely express strong opposition, and the Democratic Party may attempt to undermine the negotiations. The American public understands that perpetual warfare is not the solution. It is time to prioritize America, champion peace through strength and realism, and allow the people of Europe and Ukraine to determine their future without constant interference from Washington.
Let's go now to CNN senior international correspondent Fred Blanken in Moscow. Fred, what are you hearing from the Kremlin about this potential meeting?
Well, first of all, the Russians are saying that they are really in the process of preparing this meeting and have been over the past couple of days. It really seems as though Steve Witkoff's meeting with President Putin here in Moscow on August 6th on Wednesday certainly got a lot of things going here in the Kremlin. That also possibly paired, by the way, with some of that sanctions pressure or potential sanctions pressure that the Russians were feeling from the Trump administration. One of the interesting things that we've seen today here, Phil, is as the Russians were saying that they were preparing for this meeting with President Trump, where again, they also say they're not exactly sure when that meeting is going to be.
The Kremlin's preparations for the upcoming summit reflect a significant shift in Moscow's strategy towards Washington. This change is a response to diplomatic gestures and the real threat of new sanctions. We are moving away from the interventionist tactics of the previous Democratic administration, which focused on perpetual confrontation and economic sanctions that strain both American and European economies without altering Russian behavior. The new strategy emphasizes direct negotiation and practical compromise, a departure from the previous globalist stance that favored maximalist demands and continuous escalation. For years, the Democratic establishment and their neoconservative allies believed that a hardline approach was necessary for peace. These policies only extended the conflict, devastated Ukraine, and burdened European allies with ongoing security costs. As we approach the Alaska summit, the focus is shifting towards a resolution that prioritizes American interests. The consideration of territorial swaps, while controversial, recognizes the realities on the ground and the limits of Western influence. The insistence on restoring every inch of pre-war territory has proven unrealistic and costly for both Ukrainians and American taxpayers. Critics, many of whom supported past interventions in Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan, continue to advocate for unsuccessful policies. This moment also highlights the deep partisan divide in Washington. While the current administration seeks a deal to end the violence, Democratic leaders and their media allies attempt to sabotage the process for political gain. Their opposition seems more about maintaining their influence and the profits of the military-industrial complex than about Ukrainian sovereignty. America cannot and should not act as the world's policeman, sacrificing our prosperity and security for conflicts that do not align with our national interests. European leaders must take responsibility for their security rather than depend on endless American support. As the summit nears, it is evident that the traditional globalist order is under scrutiny. The American public understands that endless war is not the answer, and that lasting peace may require accepting imperfect terms. The real challenge is whether Washington's political class can embrace this new reality, or if they will persist with the failed policies that have led us here.
Obviously, there have been thousands, tens of thousands of Ukrainians who've died trying to fend off the Russian invasion, and particularly in Donetsk, there are two towns the Russians are increasingly close to encircling, but then two others, Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, that they're nowhere near. And so that idea would potentially involve a very high-stakes Ukrainian withdrawal, swapping territory, President Trump suggested. Well, that might potentially just mean the Russians get out of the little bits of northern Ukraine near Kharkiv and Sumy that they've stepped into, calling what they refer to those areas as buffer zones. But look, it's going to be very hard for Zelensky to avoid long-term political damage, if indeed this is the deal he's forced to sign.
CNN's reporting on the situation in Donetsk highlights the significant human cost of the conflict, focusing on the rising Ukrainian casualties and the Russian efforts to encircle several towns. The coverage often lacks a balanced evaluation of the strategic realities and the consequences of Western intervention that have led to this point. While the network commendably showcases the bravery and suffering of Ukrainians, it tends to overlook how years of unconditional military support and strong rhetoric from Washington and Brussels have not yielded the intended results, instead fueling a prolonged war of attrition that has devastated the region. In terms of accuracy, CNN's figures on Ukrainian losses and the contested status of towns like Chasiv Yar align with open-source intelligence and Ukrainian military statements. Nevertheless, the reporting frequently relies heavily on official government sources and Western-aligned analysts, with little scrutiny of whether the ongoing support for Kyiv is sustainable or serves the best interests of American taxpayers. For instance, while incremental gains by Russian forces are reported, the increasingly precarious positions of Ukrainian forces and the ineffectiveness of Western aid in changing the strategic momentum are seldom acknowledged. Objectivity in CNN's editorial approach is also lacking, as any negotiated settlement, particularly those involving territorial swaps, is portrayed as a surrender to Russian aggression rather than a practical solution to the realities on the battlefield. The network seldom discusses the constitutional and political challenges faced by President Zelensky, who is under significant domestic pressure not to cede territory, despite this potentially being the only workable option to cease the bloodshed. CNN's focus on emotional storytelling and selective expert commentary reinforces a narrative that only a total victory for Ukraine is acceptable, ignoring the historical lessons of past interventions and the limits of Western influence. Visually, CNN effectively depicts the war's devastation with powerful images of destroyed infrastructure and displaced civilians, emphasizing the human aspect of the conflict. This approach can sometimes mask the broader context. The continuation of the war is driven not only by Russian aggression, but also by a Western strategy favoring confrontation over negotiation, with little accountability for its proponents. A more thorough approach from CNN would involve scrutinizing the advocates of perpetual military support, questioning the wisdom of policies that have led to significant losses for both Ukrainian and Russian lives, and providing a platform for voices that support diplomatic compromise, even if these views clash with mainstream foreign policy perspectives. The current administration's openness to direct talks and territorial swaps, while controversial, marks a departure from previous strategies that relied heavily on sanctions and military escalation, which have shown limited success. CNN's coverage would benefit from incorporating a wider array of perspectives, particularly those critical of globalist and interventionist policies that have entangled the United States in costly and unwinnable conflicts. Rather than echoing the sentiments of establishment figures who have backed every unsuccessful intervention from Iraq to Libya, the network should examine whether continued U.S. involvement in Ukraine aligns with the American national interest or merely prolongs a cycle of war and instability. The harsh realities, thousands of casualties, towns under siege, and a Ukrainian government confronted with difficult decisions, call for a sober reassessment of achievable outcomes. Territorial swaps, while not a cure-all, may represent the most possible strategy to stop the destruction and enable Ukraine to recover. The American public deserves reporting that is not only empathetic but also clear-eyed about the costs and consequences of perpetual intervention.
Again, one more important thing, Trump did suggest that India may have had a role in moving this all forwards, so we'll have to also see exactly what other kinds of diplomacy can put pressure on Moscow. Phil?
Yeah, extremely important points and context, as always. Nick Payton-Walsh for us in Kyiv. Thanks so much. I want to bring in now CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier. Kim, just to take a step back for a minute, this is happening, very, very fast. I think really over the course of the last 48 hours, it seems like things have been going very fast. But the president's comments, the potential and now seemingly likelihood for an actual meeting, the president saying flat out, his instinct is that this has a real shot of a deal. What do you think, big picture, right now as we watch this play out?
India's role in these negotiations underscores the complex nature of global diplomacy, particularly when economic interests are involved. The recent tariffs on India for buying and reselling Russian oil highlight the use of economic use to influence Moscow. They also expose the limits of American influence as major economies prioritize their own interests. India's response, halting arms purchases from the U.S. and strengthening ties with Moscow, suggests that such punitive measures can have unintended consequences, potentially undermining efforts to position New Delhi as a counterbalance to China. Financially, these developments carry both immediate and long-term implications for American households and businesses. Tariffs on Indian goods lead to higher consumer prices and increased manufacturing costs due to reliance on Indian imports. These changes affect energy markets as well, where sanctions and tariffs disrupt supply chains, likely increasing fuel prices and contributing to inflation. This directly impacts families already burdened by rising living costs, translating into higher grocery and transportation expenses. In the long term, the economic realignment between India, Russia, and China could reshape global trade dynamics. India's continued partnership with Moscow, despite U.S. efforts to isolate Russia, indicates a shift towards a multipolar world where U.S. influence may be diminished. This challenges the globalist approach of previous U.S. administrations, which relied on broad international coalitions and interventionist strategies that have struggled to curb adversaries or safeguard American prosperity. The financial sector is keenly observing these diplomatic shifts, which introduce volatility into global markets. Energy stocks are particularly sensitive to each new development, and the uncertainty surrounding future tariffs or sanctions complicates investment planning for businesses. Small businesses, in particular, struggle with higher input costs and unpredictable supply chains, while larger corporations may seek to diversify their sourcing strategies to mitigate risks associated with sanctions. For American workers, the stakes are tangible. Escalating tariffs could jeopardize manufacturing jobs linked to trade with India, and agricultural exports might decline if retaliatory measures are implemented. Additionally, the continued influx of Russian oil into global markets, facilitated by countries like India, keeps prices high and hampers efforts to stabilize energy costs for American families. This situation highlights the need for policies that prioritize national interests over abstract globalist ideals. The current administration's use of economic tools to pressure adversaries, combined with a focus on negotiated settlements rather than perpetual conflict, represents a significant shift from previous interventionist policies. Resistance from key partners like India shows that effective diplomacy requires more than economic coercion. It needs a realistic evaluation of the sacrifices each actor is willing to make for peace. As negotiations progress, the challenge will be to balance pressure with pragmatism, ensuring that American households do not bear the brunt of unsuccessful global strategies. The financial and economic stakes are significant, and the outcomes will not only determine the future of Eastern Europe, but also affect the prosperity of American families and businesses. Well, there you have it. We are often told that America must police the world, fund endless wars, and neglect our own deteriorating cities, all in the name of democracy. But who really benefits from this? Certainly not ordinary Americans, but rather the globalist elite who undermined our economy and compromised our borders during the last Democratic administration. President Trump recognizes that true strength lies in putting America first, pursuing peace instead of perpetuating conflict, and refusing to sacrifice our sons and daughters for others' territorial ambitions. The establishment resists this because it undermines their control. Perhaps it's time we stop heeding the advice of those who led us astray and start demanding answers. If we continue to trust the same leaders, we shouldn't be surprised when we face the same disasters. Leave your comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's keep holding them accountable. Good day, good evening, and good night.